Shalom, shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem HaKadosh. Double honors to the apostles and elders, great millstone, who all learned this truth from and rule well. Peace and salutations to the 144,000, the rest of the 1/3, the Lord's multitude. Until I say shalom, come to you back with another lesson through the Spirit. And the title for this is going to be, most of the nation of Israel is okay with the wickedness going around them. Because we see all the wickedness that goes around us, especially here in the belly of the beast, which is America, Babylon the Great, the mother of all harlots. This is where all the iniquity, all the wickedness, all the abominations are being pushed out throughout the whole world. But we know that all the wickedness that stems from Babylon has reached out throughout all the countries. That's why you see in the eastern part of the world, down there in the so-called Middle East, in the Arabian countries, the land of Ishmael, you see the women and the men adopting the philosophies of Babylon, from the Mo agenda, the Skittles agenda, feminism, the black culture, and all sorts of different philosophies that Babylon has pushed out. A lot of these different countries are adopting these philosophies, and they're completely off. But most of the wickedness goes around here in America, which is Babylon the Great. That's why this place is going to be burned up by the way of fire, because what's the punishment for a harlot, for a witch, is being burned up. So that's the only solution that this place has, is fire. It's going to have to be cleansed off the earth by the way of fire. But before that happens, all these different prophecies have to play out. But ultimately, the ones who are going to be calling for this place to be destroyed and to be delivered out of all the wickedness are going to be the elect, us of the hopeful elect, that have been called into this knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. The rest of the nation of Israel, the 2/3, they're not calling out, they're not sighing and crying, they're not praying to Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai for this place to be destroyed. No, instead they condone the wickedness. They're okay with the Skittles people, the alphabet people, running around loose. They're okay with feminism and the black women, the Latina women, the Native American women being over them. They're okay with Esau, Edom, the self-proclaimed white man, ruling over us. And it's all madness, for 2/3 of our people for wanting this place to continue. But that's ultimately why they're going to have to be destroyed, because they're not sighing and crying. They're not crying out to Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai. So when the time of great destruction comes, when the Jacob's trouble starts, the hour of temptation, they're going to be given over to that. Ultimately, because they're not going to have that cover. They're not going to have that mark of exemption, which is that Tawah, having the names of the Heavenly Father and His only begotten Son written in their foreheads. They're going to, out of our people, they're going to take the 2/3. They're going to take that other mark, the MOTB, written about in Revelation chapter 13 and verse 16, that Karagma, that micro C-hip that's going to go in on your hand or in your forehead. That's the mark they're going to take, ultimately, for not crying out the Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai, and for wanting this place, this wicked ass place that we call America, to continue. That's why Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai is going to leave him here to be burned up, since they want to stay here so bad. This is Ezekiel chapter 9 and verse 4. And the Lord Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai said unto him, go through the midst of the city, through the midst of Jerusalem, and set a mark upon the foreheads of the men that sigh and cry for all the abomination to be done in the midst thereof. It says go through the midst of Jerusalem, and we know that Jerusalem is a people before it's a place, because where are all the 12 tribes of Israel gathered today here in America, which is Babylon the Great. This is where all the bulk of the 12 tribes are. We know that we've been scattered throughout the four corners of the earth. Ultimately, majority, or I would say the 12 tribes are here in America. That's why this place is gonna be This is where that great destruction, but also that great deliverance is going to take place. And that word mark in the Hebrew, that's going into the tawah, which is a mark of exemption. And that's why we're sighing and crying. We're praying to Yahweh Shemel Shai to be exempt from the upcoming destruction. And the rest of the 2/3 of the nation of Israel, they're not crying out. They're contrary to what we're crying out. They're okay with all the wickedness that goes around them. They're okay with being moles. They're okay with being YNs. Involved in the black culture. And all the folly that Israel is involved in. They're okay with that. So when the time of great destruction takes place, Yahweh Shemel Shai is not going to spare them. Because, right, it says, go through the midst of Jerusalem. So, Jerusalem is these so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, and Israelite foreigners. It may look like the other heathen nations, but ultimately their lineage goes back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And only the elect, us of the hopeful elect, we're the only ones truly crying out to Yahweh Shemel Shai for America to be destroyed. The rest of the nation of Israel, they're okay with the wickedness. But that's ultimately why they're going to be destroyed. We get the next verse 5. And to the others he said in my hearing, go ye after him through the city and smite. Let not your eyes spare, neither have ye pity. Verse 6, slay utterly old and young, both maids and little children, and women, but come not near any man, whom is the mark, and begin at my sanctuary. Then they begin at the ancient men which were before the house. So Yahweh Shemel Shai isn't going to discriminate who he puts to death. It says old and young, maids, which is women, little children, then it says women again. So these women out here, these modern day women that are proud as all hell, the proudest they've ever been, thinking that they're not going to be held accountable for all the iniquity that they've done here in America and throughout the four corners of the earth. They're going to have to be held accountable for all the adultery, all the worshiping of all these other idols and different gods. They're going to have to be held accountable for all these different sins, all these iniquities that our women have done today. Because our women, of the nation of Israel, so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, they're completely off. They're completely not thinking about Yahweh Shemel Shai. So therefore, that's why majority of these modern women here in America, throughout the four corners of the earth of the nation of Israel, they're gonna get put to death. It's only gonna be a tiny, very small percentage of the modern day women that are truly gonna repent and turn back to Yahweh Shemel Shai. Majority of them, man, they're gonna get put to death. Yahweh Shemel Shai is not gonna spare these modern women out here. They are showing their ass on Instagram, on the different social media sites, coming against the Israelite man, left the Israelite man to go back into the world and live their so-called best life. That's why it says women twice, because women have a very harsh judgment. They're the most ones that are completely okay with all the wickedness, and really a lot of the wickedness, it starts from them. They get a lot of men get put to death. They set up a lot of men, especially the so-called black men, the men of the tribe of Judah. These women are completely off. That's why Yahweh Shemel Shai is going to judge them very severely. He's going to come down with that hammer on them. This is 2 Peter chapter 2 and verse 6. And turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, condemned them with an overthrow, making them an example unto those that after shall live ungodly. And what happened to the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah? They got completely destroyed by the way of fire, by the way of that hellfire. And all that land over there by the Dead Sea, is not inhabited. And it's going to be the same thing for America. This place that we call America, which is Babylon the Great, spoken about in the scriptures, is going to be burned up as well. And it's going to be utterly destroyed, never to be inhabited ever again. It's going to get hit by those different intercontinental ballistic missiles. It's going to lead to that nuclear fire. To be an example of how not to live. to be an example, to not condone wickedness like 2/3 of the nation of Israel is doing, living ungodly lives, not repenting and turning back to Yahweh Shema Shai, still being out here being black people and Mexicans and Indians and Puerto Ricans. All that does is just condone wickedness, because ultimately being black, being a Hispanic, Latino, being a Native American, a Puerto Rican, an Indian, a Colombian, whatever it may be, that condones worshiping these other gods, these different idols, worshiping Jesus Christ, worshiping the Virgin Mary, worshiping the Santa Muerte, all sorts of madness that the nation of Israel is involved in, especially here in America. Verse 7, and deliver just Lot, vexed with the filthy conversation of the wicked. And that word conversation is going into the way these 2/3 behave. They behave completely contrary to the scriptures. They behave like niggas. They behave like Mexicans, like Spics, like Latinos, like Indians. They don't behave like the law, statutes, commandments told us to behave like, because ultimately the law, statutes, commandments was given unto the nation of Israel to be completely separate from these other heathen nations. To not act like these damn heathen nations, these damn self-proclaimed white people, these Edomites, these Elamites, these East Indians, all these different heathen nations that the nation of Israel likes to follow after. And that's ultimately why we're vexed on a daily basis for all the wickedness that the nation of Israel loves to do. You'll be at work, and you'll hear a conversation of your work, your co-workers, and they'll be talking about adultery or other folly that doesn't really have any importance. Verse 8, for the righteous man dwelling among them and seeing and hearing vest his righteous soul from day to day with their unlawful deeds. And we're vexed in the spirit on a daily basis, some days more than other, just by living here in America and having to deal and see these people's faces, see their countenance, their pride, very proudful looks. You can't tell these women shit. You can't tell these men shit. You can't rebuke them, or they get emotional on you and try to send you back to the spirit world. That's the mindset that 2/3 of the nation of Israel are in. The men are all effeminate. The women are all masculine. It's just completely out of order. That's ultimately why this place has to get put down. It has to be burned up, because that's the only solution. It doesn't matter how many times you try to rebuke the 2/3 of the nation of Israel. They're not going to get it. It don't matter if you tell them to stop eating pork, stop eating shrimp, crab, and lobster. They're still going to do it. And we see these things. We see Jake on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, whatever it may be, constantly doing all these forms of iniquity, having mukbangs with pork, shrimp, crab, lobster, rapping about popping each other's women, rapping about being moles, rapping about being feminines, talking about I don't need a man. All this is all vexing in the spirit. Having to see Esau, Edom, the self-proclaimed white man ruling over you, seeing Eve ruling over you at the job or whatever it may be. She'll maybe she's a cop and she'll pull you over. She'll try to use her badge against you. Verse 9, the Lord Yahweh Shema Shai, 2 Peter chapter 2 and verse 9, the Lord Yahweh Shema Shai knoweth how to deliver the godly out of temptations, and to reserve the unjust until the day of judgment to be punished. And that's right. All these people getting away with all this wickedness, all this iniquity, these 2/3 of the nation of Israel that are not calling out for this place to be destroyed. Ultimately, they're being reserved. They're being reserved for the day of judgment, because in their minds, they think that because they haven't been judged, because they've been doing all this iniquity their whole life. One thing that they love to say is, my grandfather used to eat pork, and he's still alive to this day. Yeah, he's reserving them for the day of judgment. He's reserving them to put him to death, to be burnt up. But that's what these wicked ass jakes don't get. You think because judgment hasn't came yet, hasn't came at their doorstep yet, that they're not going to be judged, that they're going to get away with it. But no, Yahweh Shema Shai is reserving majority of our people to be destroyed. But that's what they don't get. They don't see it. This is 2 Peter chapter 3 and verse 10. But the day of the Lord, Yahweh Shema Shai, will come as a thief in the night, That's right. It's gonna come like a thief of night, like a thief of the night. These 2/3 are gonna expect it. They're not gonna expect this place to be burned up and for them to be put to death at a mass number. In the which the heavens shall pass away with a great noise, and the elements shall melt with a fervent heat, and the earth also and the works that are therein shall be burned up. That's gonna be the end of this place of America. Babylon the Great is gonna be nuclear destruction, because that's the only solution for these damn 2/3 and these heathens out here constantly promoting wickedness on social media, on TV, pushing the alphabet agenda and your children's elementary schools and middle schools and high schools. Next month we have that PRIDE month, which is going to be promoted heavily. That's how we're in the last days. All this Moism, this alphabet agenda hasn't been promoted as much as today as the past years. It just has been heavily promoted now more than ever. So this place has to be destroyed. This place promotes nothing but wickedness, and our people love partaking in it. They love promoting it, especially these rappers, these celebrities, these actors. They promote that alphabet agenda, the feminist agenda, that black culture, all forms of a sort of degeneracy, adultery, eating all these different abominable foods. That's why the only solution for this place is to be burned up. Verse 11, seeing that all these things shall be dissolved, what manner of persons are ye to be in all holy conversation and godliness? That's right. Knowing that this place is going to be destroyed, how should we be conducting ourselves? It's completely holy and separate from the 2/3 of the nation of Israel. That's why we're sighing and crying for this place to be destroyed. We're not out here wanting for America to continue on for another 10, 20, 30, 50, 100, 1,000 years. No, we want this place to be destroyed yesterday. But we know that all these different prophecies have to play out. We know that these wicked ass 2/3 have to get worse and worse and worse, and we're seeing them get worse and worse. You got these YNs running loose. You got Eve losing her job. Losing her Section 8. You got the Northern Kingdom being deported. This is all leading to that Jacob's trouble, and eventually to that mandatory implementation of that MOTB, and then that Third World War that's going to go nuclear, that's going to lead to America to be destroyed by the way of fire. That's why we're in the way of conducting ourselves how the scriptures commanded us to, following the law, statutes, commandments to the best of our ability, doing what was commanded by Yahweh Shai, not out here moving like these 2/3 ass niggas and these 2/3 ass Latinos and Native Americans. And ultimately that's why Yahweh Shai is not going to spare them, because they're not sighing and crying. Instead they're praying for America. They in their daily prayers, they secretly pray for America to be healed. They pray to the inwardly called God, or they pray to Jesus Christ or to Allah or Buddha for America to be healed. But ultimately, Yahweh Shai is not hearing those prayers of the wicked. He's only hearing the prayers of his hopeful elect, of his elect. They pierce the clouds. This is Psalms chapter 139 and verse 21. Do not I hate them, O Yahweh Shai, that hate thee, and I am not, I agree with those that rise up against thee. And these 2/3 of the nation of Israel, they hate Yahweh Shai. They hate the servants of Yahweh Shai, his prophets, his mouthpiece. And ultimately, because ultimately they don't want to get right. They don't want to get right with Yahweh Shai. And we're grieved with these 2/3 on a daily basis, having to deal with them, having to see their faces, having to hear their conversations and the way they conduct themselves. Verse 22, I hate them with a perfect hatred. I count them my enemies. And that's right. 2/3 of the nation of Israel, they're enemies of Yahweh Shai, and they're enemies of the hopeful elect. By the way they're conducting themselves, by the way they're behaving, by the way they carry themselves, by the way they think, by the way of the way they worship all these different gods, all these different idols. Going to Esau, Edom for help. Praying for America to be healed, praying for generational wealth, prosperity, for this place to be, go back to pre-2020. These are all things that the wicked 2/3 pray for. They pray to get a new Ferrari or all sorts of madness that Yahweh Shema Shai is not with. He's not with this place. He's not with America. He's not with the wickedness that goes around, and that's ultimately why it's going to be destroyed. But the 2/3, they're okay with the wickedness, and ultimately that's why Yahweh Shema Shai is going to have to destroy them, because they're not sighing and crying. They're not crying out to Yahweh Shema Shai to destroy this place. They're not vexed in the spirit. Yeah, they're catching hell, but ultimately they go smoke a blunt or go sip lean or go pop pills. That's the solution that the 2/3 take. They don't pray. They don't lean on spiritual things to ease, all the hell that we have to catch. Crying out to Yahweh Shema Shai, reading, praying, fasting, doing these lessons. They do the complete opposite. They go do some more wickedness when they're catching all that hell. And ultimately, that's why they're gonna have to be destroyed, because the only thing that the 2/3 of the nation of Israel know how to do is just to be more wicked. They surpass the deeds of the wicked. And even us, we know that we sin on a daily basis, but that's why we pray to Yahweh Shema Shai. We hope that we have mercy, that we have that mark of exemption, because we need it. We need that mark of exemption, because we know that we don't got it. Our righteousness is as filthy rags. But ultimately, we hope and pray to be covered by the blood of Yahweh Shai, because the blood of Yahweh Shai is only going to cover the elect on his side. It's not going to cover the whole nation of Israel on this side. It's only going to cover the 1/3, starting with the 144,000, and the rest of the large multitude of believers, followers, friends, helps, families of the prophets, and the rest of the 2/3 are going to have to be destroyed. Their sins are not going to be blotted out. But that's pretty much the point. Praises is edifying to the elect. I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem Yahweh Shai, Bahashem Rokakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone, who I learned this truth from well. Peace and salutations to the 144,000, the rest of the 1/3, the large